Good morning, everybody. It is a Monday, a brisk Monday here in Noblesville. It is the 28th day of October. I'm Chris Jensen there of my great hometown of Noblesville, Indiana, joined by my good friend, Kristen Boice, the owner of Pathways to Healing Counseling. And you're joining us for another edition of Mental Health Monday. Kristen, I feel like it's been a while since it's just been you and I, so I'm glad to be back in the seats. Good to see you this morning.
Good to see you. It has been a long time.
It has. We've had some guests interwoven into us. I was doing some traveling in September. You jumped in and filled in for me. So great to be back with the OG here for a little Mental Health Monday edition. And what a more appropriate time than October, which is Emotional Wellness Month. And we're going to talk a little bit about what emotional wellness is today and ask some questions around emotional wellness. I was also noting this morning, Kristen, as I was thinking about today's show, going in, we are on the front doorstep of the holidays, which is probably why Emotional Wellness Month is October anyways, because you're getting into a very, very emotional time of year. So we can kind of touch on that a little bit today too. So we're excited to be with you for another edition. If you have any questions as we go through today, please feel free to type them in the chat. We'll try to get them on the fly with you. If not, we'll get back to you. But this is your chance to be interactive with Kristen and I as we go through this conversation. Or if you just want to just say hi, that's great too. But before we do anything at all, we're going to get focused on our breath and do a little square breathing exercise. And I'll let you take that away, Kristen.
This is the number one strategy, as you know, that I teach every single client that comes through the door. I use it with myself, my family. We actually used it when we were on the plane as we were hitting some pretty bumpy airways. Huh? And we were all, I was like, let's just feet on the floor. Let's breathe. Let's just breathe. And it's really effective in calming your nervous system and bringing you back into the present moment. We're going to start with our feet on the floor. You can do this anywhere if you're standing or sitting. That grounds your body into the here and now. So we start by pressing our feet into the floor by moving your toes, wiggling your toes. We're going to inhale through our nose for 4. We're actually going to hold the breath for 4. And then we're going to slowly release out our mouths for 8. And then I'm going to do a second breath that we haven't done before. So the breath 2 will be a step up breath. And we're going to practice that after we do our first square breathing breath. So feet on the floor, kind of settle into your chair if you're sitting. If you're standing, pressing into your feet. Deep inhale through your nose. Hold. And then slowly release out your mouth like you're cooling soup. Just noticing your body. And on this next inhale, I'm actually going to have you, we're going to inhale for 4, we're going to hold for 4, and then we're going to take another inhale and jump up for another breath up. So we're going to get another intake of that breath, and then we're going to release it. And what that does is, this is what my daughter likes to do. She likes to, I call it the up breath. If she's nervous for a presentation, she's getting into, going in for a shot, she's trying to really center herself. This is what this is the one that works for her. So we're going to go inhale through your nose, hold it. Now I'm going to take another breath in to get another deeper breath. So I upped it. Now I'm going to release.
It's like you get a second chance.
You get another up of that breath to get a bigger, deeper inhale to really, really access that parasympathetic nervous system, which takes you back into calm. So that's one also, if you like, you can kind of play with the 2 types of breathing and see which one works for you. And that's what I suggest for everybody. Get curious to see which breath, and there's other options out there as well. But you got to play with it. You got to take what you learned today and put it into practice. It's one thing to listen to what we're kind of talking about today. It's another thing to actually say, you know what, I'm going to really be intentional today about my breath. That's going to be my intention for today, is I'm going to focus on breathing and calming my nervous system to feel more grounded and centered.
Well, I got to say, I was actually at breakfast a few weeks ago where former Colts punter Hunter Smith was one of the speakers, and he actually started by having everyone do some square breathing. So it's not just the Kristen and Chris idea. It is all pro athletes use this to center themselves. It was great. I was grateful that he, as the macho Colts player that he is, was able to speak to this as well. So obviously something that's well documented and well used across societies and cultures and in different arenas, no pun intended there. So yes, breathing is key. And you kind of mentioned about the plane. We were stuck in some traffic last week too. We were doing some breathing in our car to get through that as well. So anyways, all right, let's dive into emotional intelligence. And like I said at the very beginning, feel free to chime in on the chat, anyone, or say hi, whatever you'd like to do. Have any questions around this, happy to answer it as we go through this. But Kristen, if you could kind of talk a little bit about what is emotional intelligence, why do we talk about emotional intelligence, and where do we go from here?
One of the most important components of emotional wellness and intelligence is the ability to cope with every emotion. We all want to feel happy. We all want to, we're striving, there's so many books on happiness. Like that's the end goal, is how do I become happier? Well, that's great. Happiness is an emotion that comes and goes. And so what we work on in therapy or outside of therapy, and now we're really trying to take this into the classroom to help all ages be able to tolerate, process, acknowledge all emotions. That means fear, disgust, anger, which is one that people either kind of sit in and can't transition out of, or they use it to kind of cover up, or they're just totally don't want to process it because it scares them. Disgust, all of these emotions that are so critical to your emotional wellness, your physical wellness, is essential. So what does this mean? It means I'm willing to process all emotions, not just the ones that that feel good, or I'm not bypassing my emotions. And this means when we're looking at emotional wellness, when someone comes in, I'm like, okay, including myself, I've got to look at what is causing emotional distress in my life. Okay, what is it? Is it my relationships? Is it how I feel about myself? My shame of not feeling good enough, feeling defective, feeling like there's something wrong with me? Is it, I feel depressed. Maybe I feel sad. Maybe I have had a loss that I haven't processed. It could be a death. It could be ambiguous loss. It could be a move like we talked about last month. It could be so many things. Am I dealing and feeling, or am I stuffing, numbing, trying to move away from it? Maybe I'm censoring, what emotions I'm going to allow to come up and which ones I'm going to push away from. And we kind of go, okay, now what do I need to do with this? Do I need to reevaluate some of my patterns? Maybe I'm a people pleaser and I get worth and value from people liking me. Okay, we all want to be liked. Maybe I'm so busy. I'm busying myself out of feeling because I have too many emotions in there, and it's just easier for me to be busy. Maybe I'm on social media and I'm just numbing and I'm not really connected to how that's making me feel. I actually did this with my kids the other day. I said, now, how do you feel when you're on social media? And they're like, not good. And I said, okay, let's talk about what do we need to do then to feel better emotionally? And the answer was, I need to get off social media. I need to mute some people. I need to really maybe unfollow some things I'm following. And it was an assessment to say, I don't like how I feel when I'm on this. Emotional wellness is really, it's like zooming out the lens. Let's think if let's say you're in a high rise, okay? Let's say I'm on the bottom floor. I can't see what's on the top floor. I can't see that there might be other possibilities of my view being different because I'm only seeing what's on the bottom floor. And emotional wellness is being able to go up to that top floor, get a different perspective, process everything that's on every floor, metaphorically speaking, that's inside of us, and we're accepting that we have all kinds of emotions. So I'm identifying and I'm getting curious about why do I have that pattern? Why do I feel the way I do? Why am I so ingrained on wanting to achieve so I feel better? What is that about in me? And what's the cost? What's the cost versus what's the benefit? What's it costing me to be so busy that I don't even really feel, I'm just sleepwalking through my life? I'm not really connected relationally. So emotional wellness is the willingness to process, identify, be with all of your emotions, not just some of them, and tolerate it.
Yeah, I was actually making a few notes over here. I was trying to follow. I had a few questions for you, but I like, so what I hear you saying, and I'm trying to repeat, the thought here, emotional wellness. I think I added the intelligence piece, so I'm not sure if that, but it kind of fits in here. But is the wherewithal and acknowledgement of your own self and what, not only how you feel, but maybe what triggers you to feel a certain way, and kind of like the step out of your body a little bit to look inwardly, which is not something we always think about, right? So I think that is a really key point. One of the questions I want to ask, and then I want to talk a little bit about social media, because I had an observation that I wanted to make. But you talk about emotions: happy, sad, angry, excited. Those are kind of like the top ones, right, that we hear a lot about. Can you talk to me a little bit about maybe some emotions that are a little bit more obscure that you see that folks can kind of start thinking about? I think that's a healthy exercise of like, I'm not even coming up with a good example of one, but one that maybe, pardon me?
Disgust, like everybody.
Disgust, yeah. What are a few of those emotions that kind of hide under the surface that we don't talk about every day?
And that we don't want to talk, because we like, well, that seems pretty intense if I feel disgust.
Like disgust kind of hits you.
It hits you, and you feel, a lot of people feel disgusted with what's going on in the world right now, or politics, or I mean, that's an appropriate emotion given what you might be witnessing or experiencing. So disgust is one that we don't talk about often. It's in the Inside Out movie because it's based on neuroscience, and that's why they made that a character. So Inside Out has emotions that are characters that live in the little girl's head that's moving. Now there's Inside Out too, as she grows into a teenager. But disgust is one we don't really talk about much. And disappointment would be the other one that I think is pretty prevalent. Like, you feel disappointed. And shame can be a second, like it's an inhibitory emotion, which means I feel like I'm defective. It's about self. It's about I'm stupid.
The disappointment is kind of projected onto somebody, where the shame is me.
Well, and disappointment, guilt can be about my behavior. Like, I feel guilty that I, really lost my cool with my kids. And so, but that can help me make a change. Guilt can say, you know what? I really want to change that, and I'm going to work on that. I'm going to take responsibility for that, and I'm going to work on it. And then disappointment is really deeper. A lot of times it's tied to grief, and we don't talk a lot about grief. And grief is a deep, deep emotion, and it combines sadness, anger, fear, and the sense of loss, a profound sense of loss. And so grief is one that we really, a lot of times someone will come in and be like, I'm in a funk. I'm like, okay, let's sit with that. Let's explore if there's some unresolved loss there. Maybe there's some sadness. And sometimes people are like, I have no reason to feel sad. My life is going okay. Like, things are kind of decent right now, and I just feel sad. And I'm like, let's just allow the sadness to come up and out. See, that's what we make ourselves feel wrong and bad for having feelings, where a lot of times they're appropriate given the circumstances. And when we can communicate those, when we can talk about them, maybe you need a journal about them, maybe walking and, really processing what's going on in your mind. Maybe we're doing some body work where we're identifying where we feel that in the body. Emotions live in the body. Many people don't realize that emotions live inside of you, and they live in the body. If I said, I feel afraid, I'm giving a public, you're giving a big, let's say you're giving a big speech, or maybe you have to talk to someone with a hard conversation. You're going to feel that in your body. It might be kind of you might get tightness in your chest. Your stomach might feel like you got butterflies. You might feel like, oh, I'm starting to get a headache. I've had clients come in when they're like, I have a vulnerability hangover. Like, I shared things I've never shared before, and I got the worst headache from it. And it's because the body holds emotions. So when your kids have something that they're upset about, I'll say, where do you feel it in your body? If every parent, grandparent could ask someone else, not immediately, you're going to offer empathy, and then you can say, where do you feel that inside? Where do you feel that in your body? And they might be like, my head, my back, my stomach, my eyes. That is them noticing. That's where it's being held in the nervous system. And that's the other component to emotional wellness, is noticing the tie-in between your physical body and your emotional body, and how those live together. And I would say one thing that's important. A lot of people that lived in kind of a hyper vigilant environment, maybe they lived in an abusive situation, or there was an intensity or an alcoholic situation at their home life, they're going to be able to tell me what someone else feels and what they're trying to predict the environment, but they have a real hard time telling me what they feel. And so this happens in couples. They'll be like, you're angry, you're mad, you're sad, you're this, you're that, but they have a hard time. And I'll say, okay, now what are you feeling? What is the feeling you have? And that's emotional wellness. It's taking our focus off somebody else and actually turning it inward and going, what do I feel? Where do I feel that in my body? And that's an essential component to what we're talking about, because many people will tell me what someone else feels, but they have a hard time telling me what they feel.
Well, oftentimes something that you've taught me on the show the last couple of years is that when we think somebody else feels a certain way, we start to tell ourselves a story, and we get ourselves. So I can't tell you how many times I've gotten mad at Julie Jensen in my head because I know what she's feeling. And oh, by the way, I just didn't have a conversation with Julie Jensen about it to understand how she really feels. And oh, she's really not that mad. You know what I mean? It's one of the, you get yourself so psyched up. I'm sorry, my wife, I had to use her for example. It's whether your spouse or your coworker, whoever it may be,
Anybody.
you tell yourself a story of how they feel. And you'll have an end result figured out in your head before you even have a conversation with them about how they feel.
And you're convinced. You're like,
Yeah.
you're this, and you've made up a whole narrative about why they feel that way without checking it. And I always say, check it. It's like
check it.
Check it.
Well, it's not fair to you, and it's not fair to them.
Yes.
Right? It's not fair to either party involved that you haven't checked it. So one thing I wanted to circle back on, you mentioned social media. It was interesting this morning. I had gotten up and did Orange Theory this morning, and I forgot something at home, of course. And so I was driving across town to get back to the house to pick up something. And I passed a high school bus stop at the corner of one of our streets. And you know what it looked like?
Every single person.
Every one of them. And it struck me this morning. Granted, high schoolers are kind of awkward. They probably don't want to talk to each other, right? You know what I mean? But like literally every one of them, face down on their phone. So that social media piece is key. And it's something that I've tried to work on emotional intelligence. An example of something that I'm trying to grow in my own emotional intelligence is I recently this summer, as you know, Kristen, there are oftentimes in the city, a lot of opinions, a lot of things going on. There's different chat groups on Facebook. And it was one of those things where I pride myself on being pretty active on social media. But this summer, it kind of just reached a peak point for me that I decided that I need to remove myself out of a few of these groups on social media. And honestly, it was one of the best things because it was triggering me. I was going down a rabbit hole. I was trying to watch my kids play baseball. And instead I was reading every comment on Noblesville Chatter Uncensored about how awful a human being I was, and I'm like, this is not healthy. And I always tell people, not only did I just remove myself from them, like I also like, if something's bad enough on social media that I need to know about, somebody will tell me. You know what I mean? I don't need to follow every story on there, but I needed personally to get myself out of there because it was taking me down a bad rabbit hole and not good for my overall mental health.
Yes. I'm so glad you shared that example because it's real. And this is a conversation. I love that we're doing this as a conversation because I went into the high school to kind of illustrate your point and do a presentation or a workshop on how to have hard conversations. And these kids were like, they just say that social media is affecting their relationships, how they feel about themselves. There's so much comparison. And then when people are saying stuff about these kids will post stories of other people on stories on Instagram and about the person, like you're being talked about, like your example of being in these Facebook groups. This is what people are doing. They're, instead of going directly to the person and saying, I feel scared, I feel angry, I feel sad, and this is why, we're just posting about it rather than going to the source when possible to talk about it. And because we're not taught how to do it, this was like a whole 101 class on how to take it off social media, keep the drama out of drama club, and really how to access your own feelings. Because if you can't access your own feelings, you're going to have a hard time in regulating those. Okay, so I have to stay regulated. We talked about regulation first before you have a conversation. But social media, we're not regulating first. What we're doing is we're just dumping it. rather than regulating first, identifying what we feel and then putting it on there,
Yeah.
or going, directly to the person. That's the ideal scenario.
Yeah. And we're all guilty of that, right? Of reacting so
Also,
quickly.
yeah,
Totally. And I was, one of the best advice I got too is, you don't have to leave if you want to be a part of a group on Facebook, or whatever, but you can, there's an unfollow button and you can unfollow it. So it's not showing up in front of you all the time, which I think is really, really helpful. So that
and
was just kind of
key.
one example of something that I needed to do to regulate myself, because it was affecting my relationships and my overall
It
mental
was
health.
infiltrating you. And that's the key to when I ask people, how is, like, when I was having this discussion with my kids, how is it affecting you mentally? And the feeling was, I feel awful. I feel a lot of shame, like, what's wrong with me? And I mean, it was a heartfelt conversation, and deciding to mute somebody, unfollow, unsubscribe, put your phone down, limited usage. So on vacation, I made an intention to be present with my family. I put my phone down and I could feel the ramification of doing that. Like, oh, I'm going to miss a text. Oh, I'm going to have all these emails that I'm going to have to respond to. And I just had to take my breath, soothe myself, because that was fear popping up. So I had to identify, what emotion am I feeling? Where do I feel it in my body? I could feel it in my body. And then I had to kind of soothe myself through that, so that what that looked like was, Kristen, your number one priority is to be present with your family, and things can wait. It's okay. Take a deep breath. It's okay to not have your phone. It's healthy to not have your phone all the time.
Well, I was right. None of us are that important to where if something wasn't an emergency, they would find you. I've reminded myself many times, if there's something that I need to know, that Kristen Boice needs to know, somebody will find you, whether you have your phone on you or not.
Exactly.
Get you that information.
And watch afterwards. What do you feel after you've set that boundary? So I've had the Better Boundary, Dr. Sharon Martin on the podcast. She wrote this book that I was going to show everybody, this journal. If you're not sure, like, boundaries are important to your emotional wellness. So that's an example of a boundary for myself. Okay, I'm going to get off the social media. I'm going to get out of the chats. I'm going to write for yourself. Boundaries are essential to emotional wellness. And we throw that term around, boundaries, but it's really a personal, what works for you so you emotionally feel better. It might be, switching jobs. It might be letting go of a relationship. It might be, example of, I'm going to set some limits on how much I'm going to, be on social media. There's so many options on what that looks like, but that's an essential component to emotional wellness.
So talk to me. One of the questions I had, what are some daily practices or habits that you prescribe or talk about that help people in their everyday emotional wellness journey?
So get off the social media. Honestly, stop watching the news all the time. Consumption, it impacts your mental well-being. So that's number one. Number two is, I love a centering practice. What does that mean? How do you get centered? It might be a breathing practice every single day. It might be like, I'm going to be intentionally breathe. So it's setting an intention. It might be walking, so some form of movement. I like walking personally. Other people, like you, like Orange Theory. Other people might like, some form of running, or whatever outlet, swimming, whatever outlet that is for you, some form of movement, walking if you are able, or whatever you're physically able to do. And that is key, whatever you're physically able to do. The third thing is, I love, if prayer is something that you believe in, something where you have some sort of an anchoring system there, and it might not be prayer, it might be meditation for you, it might be a form of yoga. There's many forms. And journaling, I know I'm going to go back to it. This is a form of a journal. It's a guided journal where you're going, I don't even know where to start. I don't even know what to write. Get a guided journal. With it gives you question prompts, so you don't have to do it on your own. And I say a stream of consciousness of dumping out just what's even happening in your life to get more self-aware. The one thing I'm noticing now is we're not self-aware. We're really getting away from, because I'm just getting on the phone rather than looking within. And that is impacting mental health. We have a mental health crisis, and because we're not connected emotionally, and in order to heal the body, heal the spirit, heal what's happened in the past. We have to connect what's happened in the present. How do you feel in the present moment? So journaling allows you to do that. Of course, therapy, of course, I'm a big advocate of therapy. And if you can't, you don't want to do therapy, there's free support groups. So maybe you're going to join a 12-step program. Maybe you're going to join something at your church or in the local community that excites you. Volunteer, and then get involved in something that you like. We have to be relational on some level. We're isolating more and more and more, and it's causing us to feel more and more depressed, especially when we're in transitional times.
Yeah, and I want to be respectful of our time here. So I want to kind of end with a little question and answer between you and I, so we can be vulnerable here a little bit. So can you share a time that you felt emotionally overwhelmed, and kind of what tools did you employ to get yourself through that?
So when my mom died 2 years ago, that was a pretty overwhelming time of grief. And grief takes you over like a floodgate. I mean, it will just shut you down. So you can't do everything you normally do. So I had to stop, I had to stop saying yes to things. I had to really limit what I could and couldn't do. I had to break things down in bite-sized chunks, therapy, processing with friends, really diving into journaling. It was a daily self-care practice of what can I do to what am I going to be able to do today, and give myself permission to do it. Like, it's okay for me to rest and absolutely do nothing. And for me, that was really hard. And it's giving yourself those permission slips when you might be in grief, or you might have something happen in your life unexpected that takes you out of what you normally can do. How about you?
Yeah, so I used the example this summer about the social media piece, but I'll rewind a little bit back to when I was running for this job five years ago, with, at the time, 3 small kids at home. And you've gone through campaigns with Mark, and you just know there's just a lot of things coming at you. There's a lot of chatter. There's opponents, all that stuff. And I think for me, it was really about, I needed to put a pretty solid schedule in place for myself. I needed to be able to see my kids still, so I tried to make sure I was working in the private sector at the time, so I was able to be home at a certain time to get them off the bus before I went and then knocked on doors and campaigned, and then I got home in time to try to put them to bed. But and so I tried to maintain a pretty solid schedule with a very supportive spouse. That helped me do that. I really amped up my exercise routine during that time. Couldn't sleep much at night anyways, so that's where the 5 a.m. Orange Theories came in really handy. So get up and go do that. Move. You taught me, one thing I always remember is that anxiety and things live in the body. So if you can move your body, whatever that looks like for you, that was hugely helpful. And then I think one of the best things I did was put advocates around me. Make sure that my team, my friends, my family knew that I was in a very vulnerable, a high stakes time in my life, and I needed people to speak it. I'm a words of affirmation person, which can be tough in politics. So getting people around you that can pour into you was really, really helpful for me.
Support system. And knowing one of the things I want to say is, when you are self-aware, you can then say, okay, even if you're in it and you're like, okay, I'm going to have to shift something. You knew you needed a routine. You knew you needed support and exercise. Like, this is what it looks like when you're reflective and you're curious.
Yeah. And you being emotionally aware will spark others to think about themselves. Like, the fact that he knew that he needed X will make me think about, what do I need in moments like that, which is so important. So
it's a gift.
Gift for yourself and gift for so many other people. Well, Kristen, Boice, once again, this has been an awesome conversation. I can't believe we're already half an hour into this thing. Real quick, if you're in crisis right now, though, if you are working on your emotional intelligence and you can't handle it, you are maxed out, where do we turn?
988. It is amazing. Trained clinicians on the other end. You can text, call 24/7. No matter what the issue is, 988 is the 911 for mental health. So post it up, put it in your phone. If you just are like, I am in a dark place, I need to talk to somebody, 988. 988. You could just do it via text if you want to. If you have a friend in crisis, a family member, utilize it. It's there to help you.
Awesome. Yep. And as we go into the holiday season, give yourself the gift of emotional intelligence and emotional wellness, and take some time to evaluate yourself. So, Kristen, Boice, you're amazing. Thanks so much. We'll be back next month with another edition of Mental Health Monday. In the meantime, stay safe, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you.
That was great.